I want to go back to the Moscow Declaration, which signed between Azerbaijan and Russia in 22nd February of this year. The moment was critical, of course. I do not know to what extent Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry knew about the upcoming incursion into Ukraine. Probably some knew, some don't, some didn't. But the timing was very pivotal. That declaration was a declaration of alliance between Azerbaijan and Russia. And there was an important element about energy cooperation. President Ilham Aliyev, on a couple of times in his interviews, even in the interview given after that declaration, said that we cannot compete with Russia. The volumes are not comparable. 10 BCM could be doubled, it become 20 BCM, but 148, it's a different scale. So that's the first reason we can't compete. And then he said that even those areas where we feel there's elements of competition, we will obviate competition. So we will not compete. At the same time, he signed a memorandum of understanding with Europe. He is very keen to play his own role in Europe's energy diversification policy. So I think that his maneuverability, ability to be nice to Putin and also to be nice to Europe, sort of balance to this conflicting considerations, deserves respect. It's a behavior of a grand politics, a grand politicians of high caliber. How do you see his maneuverability? Because on one of your articles, you mentioned that the shifting sands of the Eurasian geopolitical area requires great statesmanship. How do you see Ilham Aliyev's current behavior from that perspective?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I totally agree with that. You know, and what he's saying in this energy debate is very, very incisive, because some people suggest, for instance, you know, this is a transformative event, you know, that suddenly, you know, Azerbaijan is like rescuing Europe. And of course, President Aliyev knows this isn't actually the truth. What Azerbaijan is doing is helping out Europe in a corner. And reason why that is important geopolitically, to understand the difference between those two things, is because of the fact that although it gives Azerbaijan temporary leverage over Europe and it will be beneficial, it doesn't in the long term, because essentially Europe would have to stump up a lot of costs for maybe transportation, infrastructure development, but also, you know, 4% does not replace 45 or 60%. So essentially, this is a like a limited amount of leverage that Azerbaijan is gauging. So Azerbaijan cannot, you know, sort of, you know, take a position whereby, oh, all things will be rosy in the garden between us and Europe in the future. You know, it can't afford to do that. It still has to balance the other interests. Now, on the wider question, you know, about sort of the general balance sheet in the South Caucasus, the only way of actually assessing, you know, Azerbaijan's performance is by assessing it as against its neighbors. And if we look at its neighbors, we look at Armenia. Armenia, due to its territorial expansionism and due to the fact that it's, you know, it's a dysfunctional state and it's neglected itself as a state, it's fallen into a terrible dependency on Moscow. It's essentially a dependency on Moscow. There might even be some Armenians would like to take Russian passports. It's that bad, really. You know, I mean, what was it all for? You know, the independence they gained after the collapse of the Soviet Union, if they can't exercise that as a functional, independent, sovereign state, right? Secondly, if you look at Georgia, Georgia's had its problems. It initially followed the Azerbaijani road, but, you know, under Shevardnadze and Shashkevida. But the problem they run into was in 2008, you know, when, you know, they were sort of lured into the NATO, let's join NATO club. And, you know, NATO didn't take their back like they've done with Ukraine. And they were defeated very quickly, and that's led to territorial loss. Now they're in a situation whereby they've become redependent on Moscow economically, but also they've got the disdain of the West. The West is not very happy with them. And essentially, It's, you know, it has sidelined them for EU membership and for various other things. So Georgia's not in a good position. And if we look at Ukraine, it's obviously a tragedy in Ukraine. They've lost 20% of their territory, a bit like, you know, the loss of Karabakh early in the 1990s. You know, they've suffered a disaster, you know, economically, etc., etc. So looking at Azerbaijan in comparison to that, its wise balancing statesmanship, its stable leadership over years has paid great dividends. And, you know, it has regained territory. It is an economic powerhouse. It's a geopolitical hub. It is negotiating with more powerful nations and forming relationships with them. You know, there's nothing that can be said negative about, you know, the Azerbaijani leadership over the last couple of decades, you know, in that sense. So, you know, we have to assess it.
You were in Shusha, I remember, I think it was during the diaspora event. Am I not mistaken? You were there.
No, you are mistaken. I've never been to Shusha, no.
I was in Shusha, and then I met Svante Cornell, one of the distinguished scholars, and he made a very interesting point there. He said that South Caucasus used to be unified, should be together. It's a destiny, and they bound together. And he said that only one country, which is Azerbaijan, can lead this process because of their political consolidation in the country, because of the vision of the Azerbaijani president and Azerbaijani leadership on the whole, because of its resources, energy clouds. Armenia, you said its dependency protectorate or whatever we may call it. Georgia, you said it's got some similarities with Azerbaijan, but still certain problems there. So would you say that if the South Caucasus is going to be a unified force in the fullness of time, it is Azerbaijan which will be at the helm of it?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. Yes, I mean, I read Svante Cornell's article in Baku Dialogues recently. It was very good. It's on those lines, actually, you know, assessing the sort of overall, you know, the you know, potential for each state and the position they're in at the present minute. Yeah, I would certainly say that. One thing that, you know, that comes out of this actually is that, and I think this came out this was a very significant factor during the Karabakh War. Azerbaijan actually gained geopolitically against Russia because it had established itself as an independent, strong, sovereign country with a strong economy that Russia had to respect. Because, you know, Russia losing Azerbaijan as a good neighbor is actually worse than losing Armenia. And I think this played a big fact in the lack of Russian intervention during the war, because Putin, at the end of the day, he respects strength. He doesn't respect weakness. He'll walk all over people that are weak, and if he can get away with it, he'll do it. But, you know, to lose Azerbaijan as a good neighbor, which is what Azerbaijan essentially is, you know, it would be a high price for Russia to pay, and in the geopolitical considerations from Moscow, this is a very important factor. I think a lot of people underestimated that during the war. Even pro-Russians. I remember reading a lot of pro-Russian bloggers who were very much, you know, like pro-Armenian. They didn't even understand Putin themselves. You know, and I think that this is very, very important. That strength comes from strength, and that's essentially the case.